Hi, everyone. Welcome to One Book, One New Orleans community conversation called Writing in Troubled Times. For those of you who are new to One Book, One New Orleans, let me just tell you a little bit about what we do as an organization. One Book, One New Orleans picks one book every year, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we're going to grow stronger through an exchange of ideas about a singular book as a community. But when we do that, we have to realize that more than 1 in 4 adults in New Orleans, it's 27% roughly, struggle with literacy and access to books. So we develop a curriculum around the book, and we get the book and its curriculum free of charge into adult education programs throughout the greater New Orleans area. That's anywhere from adults reading at a second grade level all the way up to adults preparing for their high set, which is the state of Louisiana's GED for those of you not in the state. We also get the book into education programs in both adult and juvenile prisons. We get the book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped through a partnership with WRBH Reading Radio. And we get the book into the hands of readers who could not afford to purchase the book through a partnership with the New Orleans Public Library. We make sure every branch has 2 or 3 copies. And then in order to bring everyone together, we have events such as this. Sometimes they're online, sometimes they're in person. We're hoping to move back to in-person events, but still put them on YouTube for everyone to enjoy as we come out of this pandemic. One thing I have learned to do, though, is to ask everyone to please mute if you are not speaking so that we can cut down on background noise and microphone checks. And just after that bit of housekeeping business, I realized I have not mentioned what the one book is for 2022. It is Jarvis DeBerry's I Feel to Believe. It is a collection of his columns from the Times-Picayune, 21 years, 1998 to 2019, I believe. And as Liz Granite, one of our board members, puts it, this collection really does show Jarvis becoming a New Orleanian. The good, the bad, the ugly of our city is in these pages. It's a beautiful read and really sort of takes you back to those moments. And you think, oh, where was I in 2006? Where was I in 2013? And so you sort of get to experience these moments that you've lived along with this book. Highly recommend it. But here to do a more formal introduction of both Jarvis and our conversation facilitator for the evening is co-chair of the One Book, One New Orleans Events Committee, LaToya Taylor.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to welcome you all to the event tonight. As Megan mentioned, I am co-chair of the events committee along with Liz Granite. And tonight we're going to be talking about writing in troubled times, how to express yourself and connect to others. And to talk about this conversation is 2 of our favorite authors at One Book, One New Orleans, Mr. Jarvis DeBerry and Mrs. Ellen Morris-Prewitt. As many of you know, Jarvis DeBerry, you might know his work from the Louisiana Illuminator or the Times-Picayune, which was later rebranded as NOLA.com, and MSNBC. He has won multiple awards for his writing, and if you've read the book, you know exactly why. Amazing author. He was on the team of the Times-Picayune journalists that were awarded the Pulitzer Prize for public service after their coverage of Hurricane Katrina. And he also won an award for best trial coverage from the Louisiana Bar Association. So as mentioned, you can find a collection of his columns in this book that we will be talking about today. And our discussion leader will be Mrs. Ellen Morris-Prewitt. She's also an award-winning writer whose self-narrated audio collection has been downloaded over 50,000 times worldwide. She's been published extensively in literary journals, where she was twice nominated for a Pushcart Prize and received a special mention. Her essay, Tetanus, You Understand, was included in Sue Silverman's Guide to Writing Memoir as an example of how to use a metaphor. She was the Peter Taylor Fellow at Kenyon College Summer Writing Program, where for 8 years she facilitated a writing group of men and women experiencing homelessness. So she passionately supports us here at One Book, One New Orleans, and we're very excited for this conversation. So over to you, Ellen.
Thank you. And I am too. When I got the email from LaToya saying, would you like to do this? I'm like, me? would I ever like to do that? And she mentioned this topic, or said, if you have anything in mind that you'd like to talk about, we could talk about that. But the next couple of days, this topic wouldn't leave my brain, because I think it's just so rich, and there's so many things that we can talk about, and it ties in so well to your book, Jarvis. And so I'm going to be going back to the book often with examples, or maybe asking you to read a couple of things. Do you have your book with you? Would that be something?
I do. Thank you. And let me say before you go any further, this is an honor to sit with you and have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's just wonderful. And so the first thing, I thought if we could talk about personal trouble first, because there's writing during times of personal trouble and writing during times of more communal trouble. And by personal trouble, there's not always that clear demarcation between the two, obviously. But by personal trouble, I'm talking about your own troubles. If you've had a diagnosis, or been involved in an accident, or your AC stops working in June in New Orleans.
Which is kind of the worst trouble for this part of the world.
Yes. Then it seems to me that we're often drawn to write during those times, but that often it's a difficult thing to do. And sometimes it's because the trouble is so overwhelming that you're actually paralyzed, and you're kind of just in this white fog. Or the opposite happens, where it is generating so many things that you want to write about that it's kind of like just a tornado growing in your brain. And so I was wondering, when you yourself are undergoing a hard time, how do you find that purchase of something to hold on to that gets you to start writing? Where do you find your entree into being able to actually put something down on the page?
Say, I feel for me with us, or is it just me? Okay, you were frozen for a second. I couldn't tell if it was my internet, which it probably is, or somebody else's. Is everybody still with us? Okay, I see people nodding, so I'm going to assume yes. I may have to try to adjust my internet. I'll see if this is any better. Assuming that we're all still here, I don't think that there is a real science to it necessarily. Every situation is going to be different. Sometimes it might be an image, sometimes it might be a sound, sometimes it might be a feeling that you seize upon. And so I don't have one comprehensive answer, but I agree with you that sometimes it is too much. And one of the things that I have tried to learn over a career, I guess I would call it, of writing, is not to try to make every column or every piece say or do everything. That has been probably one of the most important lessons to me, that don't try to say everything possible that you could or want to say. It might be better just to focus on one thing that you need to say, and trust yourself enough, and trust readers enough to allow them to wait for the next thing, to say that next big thing that you want to say. And so I guess to answer your question is to try to single out one particular thing, or one particular emotion, or one particular image, and not try to do everything all at once. Because that's not going to make for any type of cohesive or focused piece.
You said it could be a sound or an image. A sound, that's really interesting to me, that to think about a sound as an entree into writing about something.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, I can't really think of, well, I can tell you one specific example that I often mention. I don't know that I don't remember if I've written about it or not, but when I often tell the story about me being in New Orleans during Katrina, I talk about how I brought in a inflatable mattress, an air mattress. I brought it to the Times-Picayune, but waited around too late to inflate it. And so before I got around to inflate it, the power had gone out. And so there was no way for me to inflate my inflatable mattress. And in the middle of the night, I heard the sound of someone, you know, those nylon bags that the big air mattresses come in. I heard the sound of someone dragging an air mattress in a nylon bag, like across this short little industrial carpet, because that's how mine had sounded when I was putting it in place. But the sound never stopped. And at a certain point, I realized, wait, that's the wind. That's not someone bringing in. It was like this like slight whistling sound that was incessant. And so when I think about Hurricane Katrina, like the first thing I think about, or the most evocative thing for me is that particular sound, which is not a crash. It's not a tree crashing into anything. It's not, you know, lightning striking. It is the sound of what I had just heard, like an air mattress being dragged across the floor, and then the sudden, startling realization that that is not what I'm hearing. I'm actually hearing something else, and something that I should be a lot more afraid about.
And only a sound that you would have known if you were there.
Correct.
Very
And
particular
yeah,
sound.
and perhaps, you know, depending on where you were, depending on the thickness of your windows, depending on the security of whatever building you're in, you may not have heard it that exact way, right? You might, it may have sounded louder to you. It may have sounded in a different way. But I would imagine that if you heard it again, that you would remember it. And people who were here in Katrina would also remember the smell, you know, coming back after, when the city, I see Megan's eyes widen. You know, there is a distinct post-Katrina smell that was part water, and, you know, the gook that the lake had brought in, and added on top of that was a stink of ash rotting on the talking about. I feel like we're frozen.
Looks like Jarvis's internet might be a little frozen right now, a little unstable. I will chime in. I don't know if anyone else was here during Katrina, but yes, the smell. It is one of those things, and I've read that scent is the strongest sense tied to memory. And it's one of those things now where even a whiff of something that smells vaguely Katrina-esque brings it right back. So thinking about a sound, a smell, and how that might be more closely tied to sort of the senses. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced that as well, whether Katrina or something else.
Yes, I have. My mother spent the last 8 years of her life in a nursing home, and the smell of the nursing home, you know, I sort of dreaded it every time I went there. But I wrote my first book, Tangles and Plaques, A Mother and Daughter Face Alzheimer's, by writing 60 blog posts during those 8 years that she was in the nursing home. And then I put them together in a book just before she died. But there was something about that smell. And I would take fresh flowers, I would take candy, I would take things that smelled good, something from Starbucks. I would always try to take something with me that smelled good when I went to visit her. And so it definitely triggers those memories.
I apologize for the fickleness of this internet connection. I wish I could control it and make a promise that it won't happen again, but I do have a hotspot and I'm trying to, if one goes out, to switch to the other. So just bear with me tonight and I apologize in advance.
Well, we're back in the situation where when I first started coming down to New Orleans part-time and didn't know your schedule in the newspaper, and when I would open a paper and you had a column there, I was like, yes, yay. So we're going to be glad to see you when we see you. And I did, since you're back, and we're talking about how you enter into, I think maybe you're back, I don't know.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Would you mind reading for us, Jarvis, from your Heartbreaking History, the essay entitled A Heartbreaking History, which is on page 208 of the book, that third paragraph that starts when I was 5. Would you mind just reading that paragraph to us?
Sure. Okay. The third paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
A heartbreaking history. Little is left after tornado lifts away roof of house. Wind and water destroy 2 homes 10 years apart. That was the headline as appeared in the Times-Picayune, December 30th, 2015. When I was 5, I graduated from the daycare at Rusk College. I sat for a photo wearing a white cap and gown and a white tassel. My infant sister, wearing a red dress, was placed on my lap. As I was picking through the rubble Saturday afternoon, I found that picture. The wall on which it hung was no more. It was no longer in a frame. It lay on a pile of debris in what used to be the den, now open and exposed to the sky.
I just think that is such a amazing example of using a concrete detail to immediately bring the reader into a troubled time. You could just say, which we often hear about Katrina, I lost all my family pictures, but that picture of you at 5 graduating from daycare is just it's so endearing. And then the wall's not there. To pull the camera back a little bit and the wall not to be there. It's it stays with you.
Yes. And one of the things I think that when you say you lost everything, or when you say you lost all your pictures, there's really no way to convey with that to readers who don't know you what you have lost, right? You're just saying that you've lost things, but you're not, there's no way to paint a picture of that which has been lost, right? And I can't say that I thought about this consciously. By focusing on the one thing that remained, or one of the few things that remained, it was a way, I think, of conveying all that had been lost. As I write, the wall is no longer there, the roof is no longer there. And I think mentioned in the piece is that my mother is no longer there, because my mother has passed away at this point. And so it is by focusing on what is there that I think helps convey the gravity of what isn't there. And I think for many people may have been the one thing they couldn't believe wasn't destroyed, or the one thing that surprisingly was spared from the destruction. And again, but again, I think the specificity could only be made from what you can actually see, and not from what you can't see.
And that particular essay brings 2 troubled times together.
Yes, and feeling, I don't think I quoted it at that point, but it was, what's the Robert Johnson song? There's a hellhound on my trail. Just feeling that, okay, how do I escape this? You know, to the irony here, and as I've told many people, is that after Hurricane Katrina, I took at least some small items to my parents' home, thinking, well, they're not going to flood, right? And then to have that house destroyed by tornado was just okay. Well, it kind of cemented for me. That's probably an ironic use of how nothing is permanent, right? That this idea that there is really no way, no place that you can go to escape trouble. There's no place that you can go to avoid the weather. So yeah, but to get to your original point, yeah, I thought focusing on that one image, and it was you know, I'm there right around Christmas time, you know, to see even the colors that I mentioned, I think would show you how this might stand out from the rubble. I'm wearing white. My sister is wearing red. You know, I'm writing this around the Christmas holidays. You know, you picture a tornado and the destruction as being kind of a grayish scene, even if it isn't, even if it's already passed. And so there was something about these colors just kind of jumping out of the rubble that I think is probably one of the things that helps that image kind of stick in the reader's mind.
And I want to reiterate what Megan mentioned earlier, that if anybody has anything they want to add or say, you know, just chime in, because that's the community conversation. So, and if something that's said just triggers a thought that you'd like to share with everybody, we'd love to hear it. I thought one thing when I think about, you know, the dual trouble that's in that one essay with the losing of these two houses, sometimes writing during troubled times, to me, does not necessarily mean writing about troubled times. One thing that LaToya mentioned is that for 8 years, I facilitated a writing group of men and women who were living on the street, weekly writing group. And of course, those were some of the most troubled times that most of them went through. You know, that was the hardest thing they'd ever been through in their lives. And I would have writing prompts each week, and the writing prompts could be used as a window for them to write about homelessness. But most people did not. And for them, that hour of us all together in a quiet place writing was the oasis away from that trouble.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to talk for a minute about, you know, when it's hard, sometimes we don't have to feel compelled to make it harder. Writing about it. Sometimes it helps, yes, but just to give us all permission to, just wonder what you thought about that.
I think that's like indisputable. I think that's what most of us want to do. I will say that the very first column that I wrote after Hurricane Katrina is not about the destruction of Hurricane Katrina. It's about the things that we loved about New Orleans that kept us there. And so it was topical in the sense that so many people were asking the question, what good is there about New Orleans? Why would you all want to go back? You know, you're foolish to want to return to this city. And at the time I'm writing it, there's, you know, destruction all around. You know, there are bodies that are yet to be recovered. There is no real sense of the magnitude of the destruction. But yet that first column was in some ways celebratory or defiant. And like, this is why we love this city. This is why we love this place. So so there is something to be said, I think. I mean, if you are if you don't have a house or don't have a place to lay your head every night, I would imagine that your fondest dreams or your deepest, richest memories are during those times when you did, right? And so, for me, doing that in the aftermath of the hurricane, there was a real fear, not completely unfounded, that the people that I saw in my everyday interactions in the city, that I would never see them again. And it wasn't, I should be clear, people that I actually knew or knew well. I'm talking about the person who takes my order in a restaurant whose name I may have never asked, or the person, there was a homeless man or unhoused man at the corner of Broad and Canal who used to sit outside what was then the Rite Aid. And I remember wondering, how is he going to fare? Will I see him again? But there were these other memories of, second line parades or musicians playing on my street, or all of these other things that, and so that column served as both a defense of why New Orleans was important, but it also served as a fond memory of something that was pleasant and enjoyable, and not something that made me more depressed or more upset or plunged me deeper into some type of abyss, but something like, I can hold on to this memory and I can hold on to this joy. I don't know if I'll get to experience it again, but it's mine, and I'm going to write it down to make sure I preserve that.
And it kind of provides a little buffer for your poor brain, that you can, it's a balm almost as you're writing that. It protects you a little bit emotionally.
Yes, it does, to think about, why you love the place. It's the same thing I think that people do at funerals, or especially after the funerals, when they're sharing good, you don't tell sad stories about the person who just died. You don't say, oh, I remember this time that, mama really made me mad and I was like depressed about it. No, you share those good times and those good memories.
Can I ask you to read another excerpt?
Yes.
It's on page 109. And it's the opening paragraph of "Emptiness dwells where home once stood."
Yes.
If you could read that you can read the epitaph that's there too, if you want, and then that first paragraph.
Okay, so it begins with a quote from the blues musician, Mississippi Delta blues musician, Son House. Look like, I'm not going to sing it. Look like 10,000 people were standing around a burying ground. I didn't know I loved her till they let her down. And that Son House and Death Letter Blues. They knocked down my house Saturday, my first house, my only house, the 3-bedroom purchase that symbolized for me my transition from quasi-adult to the real thing. Saturday, they knocked it down.
You just kind of want to let those words be there for a minute, because that's just such a perfect paragraph to me.
Thank you.
It is just perfect. And it, to me, what you've done in that paragraph is what we want to do, which is to transform personal pain into art, so that it therefore affects me.
And I can say I was trying. So in a previous life, when I wrote a lot more poetry than I do now, or I should say wrote poetry, because I really don't do much at all in that genre right now. But at a certain time, and this happened in New Orleans at
Mhm.
No More Literary Society with Kalamu Yasalam as a leader. Kalamu focused a lot on the importance of the blues and talked a lot about Langston Hughes. And for me, the cradle of the blues is kind of where I was raised. And so I did not necessarily realize until adulthood, like how steeped I was in kind of blues culture, blues iconography, as you will. So I started as someone writing poetry to start experimenting a lot more with the blues form, which quickly became my favorite form of poetry to write. And so in this particular case, I'm mentioning the blues musician who's ironically named House, right? And the whole song is centers around him realizing after his woman has died that he loved her. And so I try to mimic the blues in that opening paragraph. There's a lot of repetition. I don't know how many times I use the word house in that particular the paragraph, but there's a deliberate repetition of Saturday they knocked it down. Something I've already told you, right? I've already told you, like a blues would.
Right.
This is what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happened to me again. This, and so I was at least trying to mimic, and then there are other details, like the house was like actually blue, and so I mentioned, I think there's a phrase, I'm trying to remember, I have to look for it. Sorry, I have to skip for it. So the second paragraph, I have received word that the demolition of 1498 Crescent Street was imminent, but when I got there Saturday, the heavy work had been completed. A huge metal bin sat where my house had stood, and the broken up blue bits of the house filled the bin to its rim. So that is probably, this column is probably the best example of me trying to use and draw upon like poetic devices and a memory of writing poetry, and using repetition, alliteration, assonance, and trying to evoke that memory. But yes, I did want it to be art, and I did want it to be more evocative than me saying, I watched them tearing down my house Saturday and I felt sad about that. I wanted it to have a little bit more resonance than just the simple statement.
And before you even started talking about the tie-in with the blues in the comments, that's what folks were talking about. That paragraph sounds like the blues.
Yeah, and I'm glad, because I meant it to be just that. And I was deliberately trying to use that repetition to convey that.
And then Joanne is one of our participants, is a poet. And so she was saying how, when you read it, how poetic it sounded to her. So what you were trying to do, you achieved it.
Well, that's not always the case for a writer. So I really appreciate other people thinking so.
It's really nice. And when I read it, and then to hear you describe the depth of the details that went into it, the analysis of what you wanted to do. When I read it, I saw years of writing that went into being able to create that paragraph. And I was thinking about the value of a writing practice, and how during times of trouble, when we are drawn to write, we could really do ourselves favors if we have a writing practice so that it's there when we reach for it.
Yes. I will say that for me, and I think I said this on the very first One Book, One New Orleans event that we had for this book, that my writing would not be, the columns themselves would not be what they are without No More Literary Society, the workshop that I was attending regularly for most of the columns that you see there. And the rigor of, if not writing something every week to be read, at least gathering every week and listening to other people read and say, this is what I'm trying to do. And people say, I don't think you quite did that. Maybe you need to take that out, or you did achieve that, or that was good. And having people who would be unflinching with their criticism and their critiques, and then just doing the practice of doing it over and over and over again. They're all, crucially important. If you are a musician, you have to know the scales, right? If you are a writer, you have to know you have to have a toolkit to call upon when you want to convey a certain thing or to make a certain point.
And for me, if I'm in a personal troubled time, I may not be at the top of my game. And so I need to have those capabilities that are nascent and that they'll be there, because I may not be I need to have them come along, come along with me, because they may not be there. Does anybody else want to have something they want to offer before we switch from talking about the personal troubles to talking more about communal troubles? Although, like I said, it's kind of the line blurs, but we were going to make that switch now. If anybody has been thinking about something, or something was triggered with you when we talked about it that just popped into your brain that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Yes.
I'm from New Jersey, but I spend a lot of time in New Orleans because my son and my heart is in New Orleans, and hopefully I'll relocate there now that I'm retired. But when Mr. DeBerry was first talking about the initial reaction to Katrina, it almost reminded me, although it wasn't as personal, but it was personal, like to everyone here, when the Trade Center went down. I mean, my brother worked there. My husband was in the subway. My son had just started college and was right there. And, the first reports were coming that a small plane, we thought like an amateur pilot, accidentally went in. But then everything, the fire engines went in, and then they didn't come out. And it was just, my father had worked there and was part of the design and, the building of it. And we spent a lot of time there. And when you saw after the complete destruction of something that you knew and had a familiarity with and loved, it's just mind blowing. And I took my father to the World War II Museum in New Orleans to be interviewed. And he had great compassion, which I never knew till he actually, the interview was breaking him up for the Japanese people, because he was one of the first Americans to go into Nagasaki. And he said that the devastating destruction. So I think these traumatic events, whether they're sadly man-made, weather-related, whatever, on a personal basis and on a community basis, and as a person, just humanistically, are just devastating. And I thought Mr. DeBerry really brought out such wonderful points on how to write about them. So thank you.
You're welcome. And again, you can't do it all. Speaking of 9/11, there are a couple of pieces that stand out to me. One that's most memorable to me, I think, was published by the New Yorker for their 10th anniversary special, 10th anniversary version or issue of September 11th. And if I'm remembering correctly, is the news and notes section, is that what's in front with like the little personal essays? It's called Chocolate Cake. And the whole essay, which is probably about 500 words, is about the scene of a woman on September 12th in the general vicinity of the Twin Towers going down, sitting outside on a sidewalk cafe, eating a piece of chocolate cake. And it's impossible for me to tell you why it is such an arresting piece of writing. Whatever I say about it it's not going to do it justice. But it is one of the things that is so powerful, and it fixates on just this site with the scene of destruction everywhere. A woman simply having a decadent dessert
And what
on the
really
sidewalk.
what really resonated with me was like when you said the wall wasn't there, it's like you're looking at this trade center. I remember the ribbon cutting, and it's just gone, things
Yeah.
are just gone. It's such an impact, but the way you write about it is obviously so wonderful. So
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. And Megan is always on it. Let me just say that. And we'll applaud you for always being on it. But she has posted the piece about the chocolate cake in the comments. So it's an amazing piece of writing, and I would recommend that everybody read it.
And I noticed in the essays in your collection, like the chocolate cake, the overwhelming troubled times, that's a big umbrella thing, but you often got into them with the personal. And like when you were telling your story about 9/11, you started with the personal, my grandfather, and so it's that personal to get to the bigger troubled times seems like a way to connect with readers.
I definitely think so. I think it's really the only way to connect with readers. Even if you're not a columnist, so even if your job isn't to tell your own personal story, you can't tell the story of any kind of disaster without focusing on the people. Numbers don't do tragedies justice. You can't write a piece about that. I should say that the other piece that I said there were two amazing pieces. The other, I think it was GQ, I can't remember the publication, but it was about the falling man, that image we saw of one man who had jumped off the tower, and there was a photograph of him plunging to his certain death. But you can't tell the story of Katrina or 9/11 or anybody else, just like Victoria just told the story about, where her family members were at the time, or where they were headed, or, we all are going to tell stories through people. We're not going to start with a personal, we're not going to, generally not going to start a story with the number of people who were killed and make them some nameless mass of people.
It would be more like, I was on my husband's cell phone, and then that was it, right in the middle. It was gone. And my brother didn't show up for almost a day and a half till somebody on a boat brought him back. So it was, but then the aftermath, which is what made me think of your story, just seeing the empty land there, the aftermath is always the worst. That's what struck my father as a 19-year-old GI, going through Nagasaki.
when I think about troubled times, one of the things that comes to mind is we all, well, that's not appropriate to say. I think a lot of folks perceive the times that we are in as troubled times, and what's causing the troubles, what's roiling the waters, is a lot of political stuff. And there are a lot of columns where you address directly the political issues that are going on in New Orleans, and yet they never even get close to being a rant. And so I just want
Thank you for that.
I'd like for you to talk to us about that a minute, because I think sometimes we're all geared up. We got our opinions and we've worked this out, and we want to tell people the way to think about something. And that's not where you go with it.
Well, thank you. I haven't thought about it in quite that way. I will say that one of the things that one thing that's important to say about my becoming an opinion writer for the Times-Picayune is starting as an editorial writer, and editor Terry Troncalli telling me, like, on the first day that your job is to persuade. And that was very short and to the point advice, but necessary advice. And so for the most part, when I was writing at least in the attempt to get somebody who might not see it my way to see it my way, or to raise some questions that I thought had not been raised. I say for the most part, because I think there may be a couple of exceptions where, and I'm not saying that that's the only time that you should write opinions. I think sometimes you write opinions to rally your own side, to comfort people that are on your side, or comfort people that you think need to be comforted, or maybe like a pep rally of sorts. But for the most part, I'm trying to have a conversation. I'm trying to have a conversation as if the person that I'm talking to deserves respect and deserves that I respect that person enough to trust them to see what I'm trying to see. They may accept it or not, but I didn't and don't want to start from a place where you'd have to be an idiot if you don't agree with me here, or you're stupid if you take this particular position, because that's not the way that I personally like to interact with anybody. And so I would imagine that readers don't like to be talked down to that way either.
And one of the quotes I wrote down about this is in your next to the last column on page 267. I believe I managed to be unpredictable and thoughtful, open to other viewpoints without minimizing or subverting my own. And I think that last part is important, because we're trying to talk to people and engage them in a conversation, but staying true to your own viewpoint as well.
And so it's not that I am saying that I have to accept two different sides of a position as valid. It's not that I have to say, oh, I think the Confederacy was a good thing. No, I'm not going to say that. And you're never going to hear me say that. So there is a position. I mean, I've been asked to write such things, so I'm pointing that out. so yes, I have my opinions, and so there were many times that I had conversations and was subjected to criticisms from readers who accused me of being biased, right? And I would say that, well, it's an opinion. It's supposed to be biased. An opinion, an opinion favors one thing over another. That's what an opinion is. Now, I think they were conflating bias with unfairness, and those are two different things. If I am writing an opinion about you and I'm going to say how you are not informed or you don't know what you're talking about, and I don't quote you accurately, I don't try to see what your side is, and I give no mention to things that you have said that will contradict my point, that is being unfair. So there's a way to be fair to you and yet biased in what my opinion is. This is my opinion. I think you were wrong to say this, or wrong to do this, or wrong to suggest that this person be hired, or whatever the case may be. But an opinion by its very nature is choosing one course of action, one belief, one whatever over the other thing. And so I'm going to hold on to my right to have an opinion without acting as if my opinion can't change, without acting as if contrary facts had no influence whatsoever on me, and that I'm just going to stick to my opinion no matter what. Those are rants, and those are opinions that are not grounded in anything but the need to be right, or the need to the need to be heard. So I want it, and still want everything that I write to be worth the reader's time and be worth the reader's consideration. I will say, and I don't think I've said it in this particular forum, that maybe I said it once before, but I'll say it quickly. When I have talked to young people about opinion writing, my assignment to them has always been for them to bring me an opinion column that they think is really well done, but with which they disagree. Because I want them to be able to see the distinction between, I want them to see that a well-written opinion or well-argued opinion is not just whatever takes my side. I've seen a lot of people take a position that I agree with, but do it in such an awful way that I don't want anything to do with that particular piece itself. And so, but you can only find those things if you are willing to engage with people with whom you don't agree, and you're willing to read other people and how they write things and how they argue. So yes, I do want to keep an open mind, but not prize open-mindedness to the point where I don't express an opinion myself.
What is that quote about? You don't want your mind to be so open that your brain falls out, or something like that?
I have not heard that, but I'm going to use it.
Something like that. And talking about opinions, I wanted to ask you a question about journalistic tools that we might be able to use when we're writing about trouble. Because I noticed on one of your, When Life's Haven Turns Death Trap, and that's the essay you wrote about your frustration at the decision not to leave.
Yeah.
And how you dealt with that frustration was to go out and interview an expert.
Yeah.
So you actually you had the personal feeling, and then you went out and used a journalistic tool to help you write about that difficulty. And when I was in Memphis, I was lucky enough to take a course from Randall Keenan when he was at the University of Memphis.
Wow, that was big time.
Yeah, and I only did it because he was teaching the course, which was literary journalism, which
Okay.
I just have to be honest, it was like, I don't want to take this course, but it's the one he's taking, that he's offering. I'm going to take it.
Yes.
And I fell in love with it, because to not have to have the subject matter be me, but to have the subject matter be another, the outside thing. And yes, I could bring my views to it, but I'm not writing about myself. I'm writing about Summer Avenue, the street that I love, and so I thought that maybe that the idea that we could use journalistic tools to write about trouble might actually have a freeing effect and make it easier to write about sometimes.
Yeah, I think it does, in some really important ways. I would say to anybody listening, just as a reminder, journalists don't have superpowers, nor do we have, and more specifically, I will say journalists do not have special rights. I think sometimes people believe that we do, but we don't. By which I mean that everything that a journalist, that is accessible to a journalist, is generally accessible to you. And everything that a journalist, every place that a journalist can go, generally speaking, is a place where you could go to, with some notable exceptions, obviously. But in the main, you can ask the same person, you can call up the same people, you can make the same public record requests. Public record requests are not specific to journalists, they're for the public. And so you can, just as I did, now people may be less willing to talk if they don't think that their answers to you are going to go past you. If I had called this gerontologist and said, yeah, I'm just curious, it's just me, my name's Jarvis, I don't work for anybody, I'm just curious, why did so many old people stay during Hurricane Katrina and not evacuate? He might not have considered that worth his time if that answer was just going to stick with me. So with that caveat, those tools are generally accessible with you. I needed, honestly, while writing that column, to try to better understand it. I knew I had a frustration. I knew that I was frustrated to the point of being angry at so many people in New Orleans who had chosen against evacuating. And I didn't want the piece to be simply, I can't believe they didn't go anywhere, and because that's not thoughtful, and that's not being fair, as we just talked about. What is the fair thing to do? So it was really an eye-opening conversation with this gerontologist who said that older people in general bring in their boundaries the more they age. And we can see it in non-disaster situations. The people in my family who like to travel the most don't travel as much when they reach the 80s, or to say nothing of their 90s, right? You might be more afraid of falling. Your vision may be waning. There may be things that you are less, you're not as much of a risk taker, right, as you were 30, 40 years ago. You might not be capable of using whatever new technology there is. I mean, think about it. If you grew up putting coins in a meter, and now you are asked to take a picture of a QR code with your cell phone and to go in and pay for parking.
To get the menu.
Yeah.
You go to a restaurant, it's like, you don't have a menu.
Correct. So there are lots of different reasons. But for that column in particular, I didn't think that it would be doing readers any service just to hear me express my frustration about it. I wanted to know, and I assumed that I had the same question that many readers had. You know, why was it so hard for me to get my mama to leave? Or why did my mama refuse to leave? You know, and I hope that it came across also as a kind of public service, because if I'm remembering correctly, the doctor said, you know, don't even try to reason, just say you're going, and not, you know, go into this back and forth kind of negotiation that this may be one of the first times that you have to adopt the role of parent and flip that relationship. But it was an important thing. And so it was one of the things I've always loved about journalism, and one of the things that attracted me to the field is the potential that's always there to just reach out to somebody and say, hey, can you answer this question for me? And people generally will, especially if you're not asking them to, you know, confess to some crime or scandal that they've been implicated in. But if you just want a doctor to explain why there was a reluctance for this particular age group to leave, you know, there are people out there who would be happy to try to help you understand those things. But in general, yes, if you want to pair your feelings with facts, with somebody else's expertise, with public record, with maps, with history, with a number of things. You know, you have those rules at your disposal, even if you are writing memoir, even if you're writing a personal essay. There's nothing to stop you from interviewing somebody else. You can interview, if you're writing about a conflict you had with a family member 20 years ago, maybe call that family member up and ask what their perspective is on that situation. You know, interestingly, the piece that I wrote about the tornado and me graduating from daycare, I'd always wondered, like, why I didn't go to kindergarten. And then I realized just recently, when Mississippi was passing, I think, kindergarten legislation, oh, it didn't exist. Or no, Louisiana was passing kindergarten legislation that it didn't exist when I started out. So, but those are the types of things that you could, you know, go to the factual record to help establish the point that you're trying to make.
And, you know, I know I have alluded to this before, and so I'm probably revealing more about my psychological state, but when you're saying maps, history, you know, my brain is thinking, if I'm trying to write about something that is very difficult for me, those types of things, they smooth it, they make it easier. They give your mind something to engage in and to be analytical about, something that you can get a hold of. And then it gives you just a little bit of relief from what you're writing about.
Yeah, and if somebody is going to argue with you about how it happened or where it happened or when it happened, then you also have that kind of solid foundation on which to build your argument. And so that's also another reason why you might rely on such sources or experts or other people who can contribute it.
We're entering the home stretch here, and so I had just a couple more questions. And one of them is about, you often talk about courage and fear in writing.
Yes.
And one of your quotes is, if you're going to write for the public, you're going to have to contend with fear. And I know my odd reaction when I get a piece accepted for publication, the first thing that happens to me is fear just washes through me. And I go and pull it up and I reread it to see what I have written that other people are now going to get to read.
Yes.
And, fortunately I forget about that. And then I send it out, to send something else out, and I go through it again. But how can you inspire us to write through the fear, and and if we're working on something to make it, to go ahead and get it out there in the public?
Yeah, it's a constant fight, fighting through it, but the only way is to fight through it. I am consistently drawn to brave writers. And for me, I think one of the functions of writing is to make us brave, especially essays and memoir. I just as an example, recently, that's when it came out, I guess, 2-3 years ago, Kaisi Lehman's memoir, Heavy. I remember reading this and it's like, how on earth was he brave enough to write all the things that are contained within this book? But I think that reading writers who were brave is a way to kind of build up one's own courage. You can see, okay, they weren't destroyed. They are still here. Their lives seem to be going along okay, despite their having written this. So maybe I can do this too. But it's also important to remember, and I don't want to minimize that sometimes the fear may be well-founded. Sometimes you might be running the risk of offending people or exposing people who don't want to be exposed. So those are calculations that everybody has to make. But even beyond all of that, there is always going to be the fear of people not liking it, people hating it, people finding errors in it, people thinking you're a fraud or untalented, or people maybe even completely disregarding the emotions, maybe even some tender, vulnerable emotions that you express. I think that is, I hope that is exclusively the domain of the comment section and journalists on Twitter. But I can't guarantee that somebody won't decide to mock your pain. But I do think that you have to ask yourself, what are you more afraid of? Writing this or not writing it? And for many times, for me, the biggest fear has been the fear of not writing it. In particular, I wrote and published many of the things in the book out of a fear of cowardice, out of the fear that if I didn't write it, that I would be admitting to being a coward. And so rather than succumb to that particular fear, I had to deal with the fear of actually putting it out there. Sometimes it's not the fear of writing it, it's not the fear of publishing it, it is the fear of writing it itself, of returning to the emotions there. Probably the piece in the book that I had both the hardest and the easiest time writing, depending on what aspect of it I'm talking about, is the piece that I wrote, I don't remember how many years after my mother died, but it was about the last Christmas with my mother. It was a piece that everybody who read it and mentioned it to me said they loved and liked. But it was a piece that was very scary to write because I'm writing about my mother, during the last Christmas. And so that wasn't about what other people would say to me. That fear was more, can I bear up under this? Can I complete this task in a way that does honor to the subject at hand? but the fear is always there. It's the fear, just like people may have a fear of public speaking or dancing in public or whatever the case they may have. The fear of writing, especially writing something personal, is near identical. What if people laugh at me? What if people don't like it? What if people hate me for what I'm writing or for what my opinion is? Those are really strong emotions. I wish I had an answer to it. As I've recommended before, I always recommend the book The Courage to Write by Alan Keyes, because he gets at the psychology behind it, I think very, very well, and talks about how many of the writers that we love most always struggle with fear. For example, E.B. White, who was one of the more renowned writers of his era, everything that he wrote was out of fear. He would say every time he submitted something, he wanted to like chase down the mailman and take it back because he was so afraid.
I didn't mean to do it.
Yeah, and even Charlotte's Web is a long kind of exploration of fear and dread, and it's all E.B. White. You know, this is his eternal psychological makeup of being deathly afraid of what's going to happen, you know, and being deathly afraid of how people are going to respond to what I have to say.
See, that helps me to know that.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
helps me to know that. So that is wonderful. Megan asked a question. Jarvis, can you tell us how you chose to begin When Life's Haven with I Need You to Survive?
So there's a gospel song. I don't remember the artist right now. And the chorus is, I need you, you need me. We're all a part of God's family. Stand with me, agree with me. We're all a part of God's body. It is his will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. That's not just a chorus, that's the whole thing. Okay, so I don't know why, except that song was resonating in my head. Again, I think I mentioned in that particular column that a few months after Hurricane Katrina, my dad's youngest sister passed away from breast cancer. And similar, I drew a strong, I made a connection from my aunt refusing to go to the doctor for this lump that was growing on her breast, to the people who stayed in their homes despite the forecast that a storm was coming to their homes. So to answer the question, it was partly out of grief. And it's another way I was connecting the personal tragedy to the larger tragedy that I was grappling with, trying to understand my aunt's decisions. And I don't know, I think I mentioned in the column that I think my sister may have just played it because she's a church pianist, and I think she may have just played it in a service. But for whatever reason, it stuck with me, and I thought that it set the point in a way that it may have come across as a little too cute. And if I had just written those words, but here are the perfect words that have already been put down in song. And I think sometimes I use epigraphs such as that, or I don't think this is an epigraph, but a quote. It can be a useful tool in even if the person hasn't heard the song in particular, just to know that it is a song, or just to know that, like, you don't have to have heard the Son House Death at a Blues song to get its message of not realizing you love something until it's gone. And in the same way, you don't necessarily have had to have heard the Hezekiah Walker song. Thank you for the person who posted it there, to understand the sentiment of connecting your own survival to somebody else's survival. And so it seemed like a really good touchstone. And I often try to include things that are either cultural touchstones that everybody can acknowledge and remember, or if not that, then touchstones that even if you haven't heard it before, that you can easily access it.
And can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Megan?
If there.
The last column in the book includes the best advice you ever received for writing, which was tell the truth. So
Yes.
Tell the truth. What's the worst advice you ever received?
Wow. The worst writing advice. I don't know. Maybe I've rejected it.
Erased it.
I do think that, and I'm not saying that anybody's ever said this, but trying to flaunt your education is a really bad idea. Using big words instead of smaller words is a really bad idea. Being preachy are bad ideas. I don't remember bad writing advice. Maybe maybe it's been like water off the back of a duck or something, but I will flip it and say that I would encourage people to write in the way that's most natural to them, and to not decide to mimic people whose voices don't naturally match yours. And that's just my opinion. Maybe there are other people who would tell you otherwise. But the writer Larry Brown, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with him, a novelist. You may be, Ellen, novelist who grew up in Oxford, Mississippi. At least he lived his adulthood in Oxford, Mississippi. Talked about how he tried to write, and I'm gonna put those in like big capital, like air quotes. I think one of his first ideas was about a man eating bear at Yellowstone National Park. Like, this is true. Like, he actually like sent off submissions about a man eating bear, and he said it had lots of sex, lots of violence, lots of blood. And he said the best advice that he got was, write your story as if you're telling it to a friend. And so away went all the extra, just don't treat this as writing, treat this as if you're doing something else. Sometimes for me, I have wondered, why is it so easy for me to write an email expressing my opinion on something, but it's so much harder to write a column expressing an opinion on that same topic? And I think part of it is that we know that an email is basic communication, but sometimes we think that something else it has to be more than basic communication. It has to be this thing. And so long as you have it becoming this thing, it may block you from actually doing the work that writing is supposed to do, which is to communicate, right? And so sometimes it may be helpful. And I think was what Larry Brown's friend was getting at. If you tell the story as if you're telling it to a friend, all the pretensions of it being a novel drop away. All the pretensions of it being art with a capital A drop away. Now you're at the point of just telling the story. And so I would say that for the most part, I think most of us have a voice that we've developed, even if it's the way we tell stories generally, even if it's the way we hold conversations. When I said earlier that Kalamu mentioned blues and blues poetry, and I realized that that was my entire milieu growing up, right? I didn't have to, it so much so that it almost seemed like too easy for me to like write in this genre. I'm like, okay, maybe because I'm so used to this, it's not complex enough, right?
Yeah, right.
But
you don't get credit for it if it's easy.
yeah. But what I realized was that voice was already in me, and so I didn't like have to like flex and try to become some other person in order to write. I just had to like use the voice that was already natural to me. So I don't want to mimic any bad advice. Honestly, I don't remember any, but I would say to most people, for me in particular, and I think what kind of characterizes this book is that I'm trying to communicate. And I think once you focus on the communication part of it and remember that is what your goal is, yes, you can then get into the artistic flourishes and the particular artistic decisions. But once you consistently remind yourself, I'm communicating here. The point is for somebody to understand this. The point is for somebody to read this. The point is for somebody to be persuaded by this. Then I think those other pieces can fall into place.
That is wonderful. Thank you. And that's I'm going to turn it back over to you, Megan.
So I just want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you to Jarvis and Ellen for holding this space with us tonight. And I really loved what you said, Jarvis, about the goal of writing is to be brave, because I've been thinking a lot about bravery lately. And I'm really excited to say that thanks to Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities and Arts New Orleans, some of the bravest adults in our city will all receive a copy of Jarvis's book on Saturday when they graduate. They have finished their high set despite work, despite kids, despite a global pandemic. They got that high school diploma that they missed through traditional education. And you're all invited to come celebrate with them on June 25th at 10 a.m. in the Senator Ted Hickey Ballroom at UNO's campus. So come cheer on the graduates as they walk across the stage to family and friends cheering them on. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was terrific.
Really
Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for those great questions, Ellen.
You're welcome. I very much appreciated it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, till next time, folks.
Next time.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Night.